This is our usual bi-monthly chats, which I'm sure a number of you have now been to. I'm hoping that a few of you were at our last event, which was to celebrate International Women's Day, and where the theme was Choose to Challenge. I know that at the last event, I very much operated outside my comfort zone when we were doing all of those wonderful exercises that Radha had us do. And for those of you who are there, you'll be pleased to know that I am looking at my camera, not at you, and I have both feet on the floor so that I am presenting properly. What we did in that session was we learned how to hold ourselves and the preparation, some of the preparation that we need to do to have those difficult conversations. Now, what we had intended to do, and which you very kindly fed back to us after the event, is that you would like a session on how to have those difficult conversations. And what we thought would be really good today is if we could have a couple of speakers who could help guide us through those conversations. So I'm really pleased today to welcome Anita Roche and Nick White. Anita is from Oak Ridge and is a HR and change consultant. What she's going to do today is she's going to talk you through the preparation and steps that you should take in order that we can put ourselves into a confident space to have those difficult conversations. It is going to be interactive. She's going to ask you to participate again. So, you know, no getting away from the whole Radha experience. But please do, because what we'd like to do is we're going to put that into a blog afterwards so that we can put something out in the Pro Manchester space about how to have these difficult conversations. Nick White is a managing partner at Brabner's, and what he will be doing is to be talking about what Brabner's have done in order to facilitate those difficult conversations. What he's also going to talk about is how you can create that culture where there is a safe space to have those kind of conversations, and some top tips on how to have that conversation. Once we've heard from our two speakers, we will do our usual breakout rooms. We'll take a view that once we get to that stage as to how long we'll break out for, we'll come back for a wrap-up session where we can feedback what we've all talked about and our life hacks on how to have those difficult conversations. And hopefully by about 11 o'clock today, or as Sean says, we normally run over a bit after, we can all go out there feeling super confident and in a good place to have those conversations. So what I will do now is hand over to Anita.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to share with you today is probably for around about 30 years worth of my career. I've been in roles where actually if somebody had had that difficult, challenging conversation earlier, we wouldn't have been in the place that we were at the time. But people, for a whole variety of reasons, don't get round to those difficult conversations. And that can then mean that we've got strained working relationships. It could even be family relationships or friendships that possibly get broken just because we didn't have that conversation. And in some cases, those people that we feel like we need to say something to are not aware of the impact that they're having. So before I get us started, what I'm going to try out, so hopefully this works, is in the chat, I'm sending you all a link to something called Mentee Meter. Some of you may have used it before, some of you may not. But if you click on that link, I'm asking you, hopefully that's what the question is that you get, what actually stops you having those difficult conversations? Try and give it me as simply as possible, ideally one-word answers. So just give me some ideas of what it is that stops you having those conversations. And what I'm going to do, if I can actually move my screen back over, is start to share that information that's coming through. Okay, I've had about 6 of you have a go. Let's see if we get a few more coming through. Wow. Lots and lots of different thoughts and ideas coming through here. Awkward, people wanting to please people, worried about repercussions. What about the confrontation that you might get? Nerves, time, discomfort, confidence. Confidence seems to be a very strong one. Wow, lots and lots of different thoughts there. Awkwardness, stress. It's not an easy thing, is it, this? Trying to sort of think about what you might do in that situation. So thank you for those. I've still got a few coming in, but what I'm actually going to do now is nip on to the next one. So hopefully now you will get another page coming up. Has that happened for you? Just here, if anyone can say yes, they've got another page now or another question. Yeah. Have a go at this one then. So this next one, here we go, we've got some going. How or for yourself. So give us some ideas there as well. Lots and lots of thoughts coming through. So if I hover over this one, actually doing something for a colleague or a 8 out of 10 score, we're getting to a point where people are feeling like they could do that for a friend or a colleague. But actually, we've got almost a split vote here. Standing up for yourself is a little bit harder by the looks of it. So maybe only about half of you really feeling like you'd feel confident in some way to actually stand up for you. What we'll do is actually give you the opportunity to share that later. Now, I'm just seem to be, am I locked here? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you've frozen, Anita.
Yeah, I've what, sorry? Oh, here we are, that's better. I've got a stop share. I'm trying to press stop share. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
For some reason or other, I'm hanging. I might just have to, I'm really, really sorry. I might have to leave you and come back. So I'm just thinking maybe, Nick, if you do your bit and then I'll have to do my bit afterwards, is that okay? Because somehow my screen's not allowing me to escape to share, to actually come back to see you all.
Fine by me. You happy for me to press ahead, Nicola?
Yeah, I certainly am. Thank you.
Yeah, no, fine. Well, look, thanks, Nicola, and good morning, everyone. I have a feeling that one of the things that Anita was going to talk about was self-talk. And just before I share what I wanted to talk about, I wanted to sort of acknowledge the fact that it's certainly something I've had since early age. And I think it's similar to imposter syndrome, actually. It's something that I think the vast majority of us experience, whether or not we acknowledge it. It's not that uncommon, but it needn't hold you back. So just a quick plug. I have a book that I really recommend on self-talk. It's called What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by a guy called Shad Helmstetter. You can get it on Amazon. It's about £6. I'd really recommend it. It's a good read. You're back, Anita. Do you want to jump back in?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so sorry.
Because I think I follow you better and frankly, a better speaker. So.
Okay, so my severe apologies for that. I don't know what happened, but I hung as I was trying to get off my Mentee Meter screen. So hopefully you saw there were lots of comments coming through around things that stop us, which typically relate to our emotions. Those emotions of ours kick in really quite quickly and they stop us doing all sorts of things. I'm going to hopefully share my screen more successfully this time, and be able to get back to you as well. So if one book, again, Nick was just telling you about a book there. There's a book that my son suggested I read once when we were on holiday in Rhodes. He kept saying, Mum, you need to read this book because it'll explain why you're such a melt, was his phrase. And it's called The Chimp Paradox. And that really struck a chord with me, because basically it packages your emotions as if they're a chimp in the jungle trying to survive, and sort of using all those basic needs that you actually have as a human to survive. And he says that chimp, that our emotions kick into action 5 times faster than what he calls our human brain. Now, that human brain of ours is the thing that's rational, logical, sensible. But our chimp is our emotions. They jump to conclusions really, really quickly. So all those things that you were saying in the Mentee Meter that I will share with Sean later so that he can give that out for you. All those things like being nervous, being worried, building up stress, worrying about repercussions, all of those things kick in really, really fast. Eventually, though, that human brain of ours can catch up. It takes a while because that chimp works 5 times faster, but our human brain then kicks in, and that then allows us to really think about how we can deal with these things in a rational, logical, and sensible way. So when you go into any sort of situation, I don't know whether any of you have come across transactional analysis before, but if we can operate on an adult to adult plane, they say in life we can exist in 3 different states: as the parent, as the adult, or as the child. And even at young ages, we have the ability to operate in these 3 states. Now, this happens in my house the other way around. So my daughter comes to me like a controlling, critical, finger-pointing parent and says, how come there's so much washing still there in the washing basket, Mum? I need these jeans. I then, as a result, because she's treated me like a controlling parent, become a rebellious, tantrum, difficult child and go, hold on a minute, why are you having a go at me? You're 19, you're more than able to work the washing machine. Why is it me that has to do that? So if we operate where we're trying to hold these difficult conversations in a controlling, critical, patronizing way, we're a bit bossy, a bit parent-like, the people that we're likely to deal with are more likely to have that chimp jump out at them and be rebellious, maybe show tantrums, maybe be a bit difficult. But if we allow that human brain to catch up and operate like a reasonable, logical, rational adult and try to really objectively deal with that individual, hopefully we'll get an adult-like response back. And you may well find that that conversation went far, far better than you ever thought it would. So in the time that we've got, I'm going to just leave you with those thoughts, and we can explore those a little bit more in the breakouts. But hopefully I'll successfully stop sharing now, and then I can hand over to Nick to talk about what they've done to try and make things like that really easy to do in his workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. So firstly, I have slide envy because I don't have any slides, but hopefully that also means my broadband won't let me down. So thanks. As I was saying before, and I'll maybe send a note after, you know, self-talk is something I suspect all of us experience, and generally my experience is it tends to be negative. But much like imposter syndrome, you know, I'm firmly of the view that it's something that you can either overcome or live with, and it needn't hold you back. And on imposter syndrome, because my imposter syndrome alarm light is starting to flicker on my desk, I think whereas Anita clearly is qualified in this area, I'm absolutely not. So what I'll share with you, which is maybe looking at it from the other perspective, from the employer's perspective, is merely based on my experience as a managing partner at a law firm. So I'm just going to briefly cover 3 different areas. So firstly, just share some, I've got some notes, because just going to share some thoughts and ideas about what we've done at Brabner's. Secondly, on the basis that, as I'm about to explain, culture is key, I'm going to share 3 tips on how to create that right culture to enable those difficult conversations to happen successfully. And then finally, a few tips on how to actually approach the conversation itself, which, as I said, is more from the employer side, but I guess hopefully there'll be some things in there which resonate. So back to Brabner's then, and let me just make this clear. This isn't intended as an advert. We are far from perfect. There's lots of things that we can do better. And we're very much on the journey of trying to do better. But hopefully, if I share some of the examples, it gives some food for thought. The first thing I wanted to say, stating the obvious really, is the workplace is, of course, a home to numerous difficult conversations, whether that's conversations about pay, working conditions, performance, inappropriate behaviour, and that is uncomfortable. But the point to remember is it's generally uncomfortable both ways. So the person having the conversation with you is almost certainly equally uncomfortable. I think successfully navigating those difficult conversations is multifaceted, and ultimately you can have all the systems, processes, policies and procedures in the world, but they won't work unless the culture is right. So for me, the key to focus on is culture. You have to create a culture of trust and mutual respect, where people feel that they can be safe in having an open and honest conversation in a respectful way, and where they are listened to and they do feel valued. So focusing then on culture, and it's certainly something we're very proud of at our firm, and we work really hard to try and engender. Critical components are it being a culture of openness, empowering and encouraging colleagues, making sure there's no room for egos, status and hierarchy not really counting for much, and making it clear that everyone does have a voice, they can contribute, they will be heard, and that we don't have all the answers, and we actively encourage that input. Now, it's easy to say that, but you've got to really bring that to life in practice right from the start. So, for example, every quarter I have it's been virtual, but a meeting together with our CEO with all new starters who've joined the firm in the previous quarter. And that's one of the points I really hammer home. And actually, I'm a lifer. I've only ever known Brabner's. I've been with the firm for 26 years since I trained. And I rely on people coming from other firms and sharing their experiences from elsewhere to help us do better. So I make that really clear from the start, that we want and expect people to know that they have a voice and to share those ideas. And then it's all about sort of reiterating and repeating that to really bring that message home. And then from my personal perspective and the sort of leadership team, I guess my contribution is partly in helping to set the tone and environment, to try and be human, down to earth, open and approachable. So with that said, then I'll just share 4 examples that we have pursued to try and create that environment of trust to facilitate difficult conversations. So firstly, we've moved to a continuous approach to performance management and objective setting. So we've moved away from the traditional approach to appraisals being irregular, possibly annual, and more of a sort of form-filling exercise, which my view is, number one, that tends to mean that it's led by the business, not by the individual. Secondly, it almost creates anxiety because it creates such a big build-up to an irregular appraisal. So instead, what we do is now it's we focus more on having regular, valuable conversations between line managers and colleagues, at least quarterly, but often, far more often. And it's very much driven by the individuals themselves. It's facilitated by a system. We have a system called Clear Review that facilitates it. But the key is really to give autonomy to those individuals, to have those conversations and help build a trusted relationship with their line manager, which in turn, I think, allows for a more open, honest and meaningful dialogue, which often leads to what traditionally have perhaps been seen as difficult conversations being much less difficult. And then in addition to that, we've also adopted a 360 approach to feedback, empowering our people to also provide feedback to their peers and managers, as well as requesting feedback for themselves. Secondly, then, beyond and outside the sort of appraisal performance management process, it's about facilitating multiple means of finding and being able to give that feedback. So again, just a few examples. We have a dedicated email group called Your Voice at Brabner's, which comes straight to the senior leadership team, where we encourage colleagues to use that to provide feedback, share ideas, and it's clear that that's something that we openly encourage. Secondly, I think another key element is giving colleagues multiple different ways to get involved, to build their confidence and to find their voice. So for example, we have, as many firms do, I'm sure, an EDI committee, and alongside that committee, there's 5 affinity groups that focus on social mobility, LGBT, BAME, mental, physical health and gender equality. And between those 5 affinity groups and our EDI committee, we have almost a quarter of the firm. So that's about 100 of our 400 people actively involved, and it's a real mix of people. And I think that being involved in groups like that, likewise charity committee, the innovation group, sustainability committee, gives people the opportunity to find their voice and build confidence that actually they can be heard, and that what they have to say is valued. Thirdly, I think the whole approach to leadership and management and the policies and procedures that underpin that. And this is where I do think that hopefully the pandemic will give some positives. So I think the pandemic has taught us, and I'm sure we're no different to anyone else, that the old style of sort of command control, parent-child relationship within an organisation is very much a thing of the past, and it's now more a sort of trust-based relationship. The reality is we, like many organisations, have for 14 months trusted our colleagues to contribute from afar, and they've repaid that trust in spades. So why would you return to the old way of working? So the policies and procedures need to reflect that, and we're currently working on a sort of culture code which reflects the understanding that our people are professional adults who should be entrusted to deliver for the business in the way that best suits their needs and circumstances and empowers them to be their best selves. So I think that approach generally means, particularly what traditionally might have been difficult conversations around working hours or location, no longer needs to be viewed that way. The message is clear that agile working is the future, and it's actually accepted and encouraged. And then finally, I think it's critical to have a robust wellbeing strategy and a benefits package that offers support to people across a whole spectrum of health and well-being, from mental health, physical, financial well-being, and then to back that up with communications that really do normalise health and well-being, in particular mental health, which again, I think is probably a very common area for difficult conversations, to really try and open up dialogue between colleagues. In addition to that, we've, as many organisations will have done, we've invested in mental health, first aid training across a mix of people, so colleagues have an avenue to have those confidential conversations in relation to their mental well-being. And then finally, alongside our annual leave, holiday leave, we've introduced the concept of wellbeing hours, where everyone has, in addition to their leave, a bank of hours that they can just take without question whenever they wish to support their well-being. So that's some sort of tips based on what we've done at Brabner's. So moving back then to culture, as I said, for me, the key to all of this is to create the right culture for those difficult conversations to happen successfully. And there were just sort of 3 tips I wanted to briefly share. So firstly, it's key to build a foundation of trust and safety. Having difficult conversations requires trust and respect. If employees fear that by sharing their innermost thoughts, that somehow has the potential to carry professional, financial, social or emotional risk, then they're unlikely to be open with you. Whereas when employees know that they're safe to share their thoughts respectfully, without fear of punishment or consequence, I think it gives them that green light. So fostering a safe place for those sensitive conversations and paying attention to the way you react to the feedback and the ideas, again, I think is critical. I think if colleagues witness managers shutting them down or retaliating, or there being negative consequences when they come to you with honesty, then they're unlikely to share in the future. Secondly, it's key to be open and supportive of ideas, so encourage colleagues to speak up. You need to demonstrate that trust in your employees by listening to them, include them in the problem-solving process. Ask your employees for their thoughts on any situation, and be open to their feedback about your ideas, and also show some vulnerability perhaps in admitting that you've got it wrong or you don't know the answer. And then finally, the third tip in building that culture is all about response and action. So it's key that employees, having had those conversations, they see what the impact is. If you don't respond with action or answers, I think it then comes across as a tick box exercise and it undermines the sincerity. Instead, it's key that you've got to sort of close the loop. You've got to show the employee how that feedback's used. And if their ideas aren't going to be used, then you've got to acknowledge that and explain why, so they at least know that they've been heard. And then finally, then, as I said, this is, I guess, more from the employer side, but there might be some comments here that might resonate. So I think from the employer side, having that difficult conversation, there's 6 quick tips I'd share. Number 1, be prepared. So be prepared and informed, and come to that conversation with concrete examples and evidence. Keep the conversation focused on fact and behaviour, and don't rely on opinion or feelings. Secondly, honesty and vulnerability, and this is certainly something I focus a lot on. There's nothing wrong with the employer saying that they too are uncomfortable, and I think by doing that you actually share the burden, and it sends the message that you're in this together and that you're there to help. So I will often have difficult conversations where I openly and in an upfront way make it clear I find this difficult and I'm uncomfortable. And I think that's quite important to sort of help humanise and make it a shared burden, as it were. Thirdly, cut to the chase. Don't beat around the bush, just come straight out with it. Avoid being judgmental, and keep your words and tone clear, neutral and direct. My 4th tip is to be inquisitive. So don't come into that conversation assuming that you understand the problem and what its causes are. Remember, the goal is to have a conversation, a two-way conversation. It's not a lecture, and you need to involve the colleague in the problem-solving process. And I think it's key to give space to your employee, your colleague, to express their perspective on the issue, so you've got the context from their perspective, and that I think will help address the problem and support the solution more effectively in a mutual way. And then next, I would say explore solutions. So emphasize that you're there to work with the colleague to find the solution. By working together and brainstorming together and deciding on a plan of action together, you can help the employee take ownership of both the issue and its resolution, and creating a sort of path to success and resolution. And then finally, a bit like my point earlier about action, recapping. So, end any meeting by reviewing what you've agreed, agreeing what actions and follow-up you're each going to do, just to check that you are both on the same wavelength and understand what happens next. Back to you, Nicola.
Thanks, Nick. And what we're going to do now is go into our breakout rooms. We are at 25 to 11. So if we come back with a very quick wrap up at say 5 to 11. So if we have 20 minutes in our breakout groups, is that okay, everyone? And Sean will now put us into our groups.
Yeah, are we sticking with 4 breakout rooms?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Getting the conversation started, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm Emma. I actually work for myself, but I have worked in corporate environments for most of my career. So just and the job that I do needs quite often to hold difficult conversations. I'm a town planner. So my company is ACE Town Planning. So
I can imagine they are quite tough conversations from time to time.
yeah.
I'm Cara. I work with Rebecca Durrant, which probably some of you will know at Crow. So I'm head of people development, and so quite familiar with lots of HRE difficult conversations, but we're doing a lot of work around equality and diversity at the moment, and it's how can we equip some of our people perhaps who haven't been around the block so many times to have the courage to have some of the conversations that they need to, and just, you know, listening into how different people are doing that.
I'm Penny. I work for the Oakridge Centre with Anita, and I'm the business relationship manager. I've only been in the role since November, so I'm still sort of like learning the process. But I mean, there are sort of part of my role is to look at within our organisation, our processes and things like that. And I think that there are going to be some difficult conversations that I'm going to have to further down the track on. We need to change the way things have been done, and there are some things that have been done for a long time but are not working. So it's that I think I'm going to have my work cut out with me. So I might be having a word with Anita to see how I do this.
Hi, I'm Jane Spears and I'm a lawyer at Evershed Sutherland. So I specialise in real estate law. And I suppose for me, I'm kind of that middle management role. So I have the difficult conversations both ways. And it's trying to find that balance of having them with the people that report to you, but keeping on a good relationship level with them, but also in terms of progression and the expectations from above, you know, them delivering the message down to me, and you know, the impact that that then has on me and the role that I do. So yeah, can often be a tricky balance.
Were there any bits of that kind of resonated with any of you? Because I really I've obviously I'm a training development person, so the whole transactional analysis one made me smile, because it's something that I've always kind of, when I learned about it years ago, kind of kept in my head, which is that stay in the adult. So even when you're kind of feeling a little stressed or angry or cross about something, it's just taking a deep breath and trying to really, as I say, stay in the adult. I think it's a really good little tool or tip to remember.
I think for me, it's about preparation. So if I know I'm going to have a difficult conversation with someone that reports to me, it's about taking the time beforehand to think about, you know, the action and the consequences and what I want to say and how I deliver that message, rather than doing it in a, you know, and I mean, especially now with the whole virtual thing, it's even more important that not the script really, but, you know, the impact that that conversation has, so that you can manage it. And again, finding the time in their diary and not just kind of phoning them up on the hoof so that they don't know to expect it or something like that. And likewise, if I'm doing it the other way around, like, what do I want to achieve from that conversation? If it's difficult, as in if it's me preparing it, or equally if it's being delivered to me, you know, the same kind of preparation that goes in. You can't just show up to these things and just wing them, really. It just doesn't work.
No, it definitely doesn't.
I know I worked in the corporate world for 20 years and I was made redundant. And I mean, it's one of those days when you go into the office and you're told it kind of sticks with sticks with me. And I always remember that, yeah, okay, for me, it was the first time I'd heard this. I mean, I had an inkling that what was happening. But the guy that was delivering it to me, he'd spent literally the whole day having the same conversation with umpteen people. And I know that there were some people that didn't take it too well. And I remember saying to him, you know, this can't be a great day for you. And I think I was the first person that actually said that to him. And I know that the one thing was that I always wanted to leave the company with my head held high and with my dignity. Whereas I know that there were quite a few people that, you know, the chimp came out in them, and there was a lot of gnashing of teeth and ranting and raving at people. And it was hard not to take it personally, because it wasn't personal. But yeah, and you know, and one of my colleagues who, you know, was staying because they felt guilty, they were staying and I was going, they sort of said, you know, that they really found it amazing how I dealt with it in a very mature way compared to some other people. So I felt quite proud of that I did it that way. But it was hard. It was hard.
Perhaps comes with experience, because I've been made redundant as well. And when I was much younger, and it was a big shock to me, and I definitely, the chimp definitely probably did come out, but not, you know, I didn't go crazy and smash up the office or anything. But yeah, as I've got older and I've dealt with similar sorts of situations, you know, I've learned to realize it isn't, you know, even if it is personal, not to show that. Yeah, it's hard though.
Yeah, it is.
It is a personal thing, being made redundant.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Oh, the time is not running out. So
I was going to say, because obviously as an HR person, I've been on the other side of the table, if that makes, in terms of making people redundant, or, you know, and I think there's a difference, isn't there, sometimes between, you know, you guys doing your jobs are, you know, town planning or kind of, I think at Jane, was it a kind of lawyer, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
You know, you feel kind of comfortable and confident in your kind of professional area, and sometimes that doesn't, there are obviously people involved and there are heightened kind of emotions, but it's not yours. And so it's kind of, sometimes, I wouldn't say it's easy to manage, but you can kind of put that in perspective. But as soon as you start getting into people type territory, it can get really emotional. And you never quite know in any of those situations how someone's going to respond to it. And I think, out of respect to the individual, you've got to be able to take a step back and appreciate that whole range of emotions that's going on in someone's head at that particular time, and just recognize it for what it is. Actually, it's kind of shock, it's denial, it's anger, it's all of that kind of stuff, and just stay in the adult. Because actually, you if it were me on the receiving end, and that has, it's not, it's, you know, it's challenging. But if you can do what you did, Penny, and take a big deep breath and, you know, look at it for what it is, actually the conversations do become easier, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, and it did get a lot worse as well, because they then sort of were saying, oh, we've got to pass your work on to someone else. And they said, oh, we might have to recruit somebody. And I'm sitting there going, hang on a moment.
Doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. But, you know, there again, it was just taking a deep breath and just sort of saying, you know, and I mean, at one of the meetings I had, I mean, bless my boss, we sat in this meeting and we walked out and he just came up and he put his arm around me and went, excuse my language, she said, that was a right shit meeting for you, wasn't it? And I went, yeah, it was a bit.
Yeah.
You know, but there again, you know, it's how you handle it and things like that and that sort of thing.
I think, Cara, you know, obviously you're coming from the HR side of things, so you are, you know, that's your specialism, dealing
exactly,
with
yeah,
people and stuff. But a lot of the time in, you know, professional services or other roles, you end up being promoted, or, you know, like Emma, you run your own business, you know, you take that on because you're good at your job, and then all of a sudden you get all these other managerial things, and it's like, okay, I went to university and I went to law school and I did a training contract, oh, and now like I'm a manager of people, but you don't always get the same training. And I mean, at my firm, they're pretty good in terms of helping you to deliver the conversations, but in terms of the emotional and the people side of things, you know, that's kind of removed from it a little way, because it's all about getting the message across so that you know, you can fix or change the behavior or help develop that person, but it's not really about the emotional side, and the fact that, you know, I'm like shit scared to have that conversation, and also you've got someone like who's really defensive, emotional, upset, you know. Ecstatic would be great, but those conversations don't take that long generally.
No, I get what you're saying, Jane, absolutely, because obviously I work with accountants and so kind of like, you know, technically very
send them
good
a spreadsheet, they're great, but you know, put them in a room with someone that might cry, then that's different.
And I've been doing some kind of management development training with some of the groups, and kind of like the whole thing about kind of constructive, quality, objective feedback, all of these sorts of things, and there's some tools and all that stuff, but it's the one thing that everyone wants actually is good quality, constructive, objective feedback. and having open conversations. But it's the one thing that most managers absolutely get themselves tightened up little kind of balls of anxiety over. But it's trying to kind of like shed the light. It was like there's some ways of doing things, but actually you're not there are, making someone redundant clearly is not a positive message, right? That's a kind of different thing. But actually, if someone's most people are wanting feedback to understand what they can do better, can do differently, all those sorts of things. And so they are welcoming the conversation, and it's trying to get that kind of light bulb in people's minds that, there are ways and means of delivering a message. Of course there are, but most people are welcoming of quality, constructive feedback.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely. I mean, I've been in my many years in corporate before I went on my own on the receiving end of poor management, to be perfectly honest. I've been unfortunate and in that regard. But I think as well, particularly since the crash in 2008, a lot of companies just scaled back on things like proper management. And that's really, and so people are like, professional technical people are still getting promoted into those people management roles, but they have not been given the skills by the companies that they work for, who don't necessarily, who've been trying to cut as many corners as possible to deal with it, and that negatively impacts the company in the long run. But it doesn't seem to, it doesn't seem to have, that message doesn't seem to have translated, does it? In a lot of companies, not all, obviously, but the ones I've been in, maybe.
I guess it's that kind of like someone mentioned imposter syndrome earlier as well. And again, it's kind of when the feedback thing, you kind of like you there is a tendency to kind of like lose a bit of confidence, despite the fact you probably do know what you're talking about. You do have the evidence, you do have prepared, but it's like someone's going to catch me out type thing. I think there is there is a different level of confidence required when you're having a personal conversation with someone about them, as opposed to a point of fact or law or planning or whatever it happens to be.
But there have been sort of studies done that if you actually do provide your managers with these tools, your staff retention is kept, and also you're not getting to a point where your staff, you go into tribunals and things like that, where things have escalated to a point where you then have to as a company start spending loads of money because the whole communication has fallen down. So it is really quite important that this sort of thing happens. And I think there again, if you don't train your managers at that, then the people that they recruit will be the same as them, and then you just get this whole layer. And you can't actually how do you then break the cycle?
I've got quite a depth over the years about demonstrating return on investment of kind of soft skills training, because actually it's all kind of it's difficult. It is difficult to quantify, but you're absolutely right, Penny, because actually the kind of mental health of the individual going through a kind of conflict experience, the mental health of the person trying to manage that, the time that's spent around all of these things. Add all of that kind of stuff up together, and actually for a bit of training or a bit of coaching on how to kind of have these conversations mitigates against so much of that fallout. I agree with you.
And also there was, I attended a webinar that McKinsey's did on sort of how to be the better boss. And the one thing that was like the top thing was that you've got to make sure that your bosses are looking after themselves and their mental well-being, because if they're not in a good space, it all crumbles. And I think that it's that's the one thing that I think a lot of companies seem to be spending quite a bit on is mental well-being and stuff like that. But it's still trying to get that built into the culture, isn't it? But sometimes it's okay not to be okay.
I think you're right, Penny, about the time that it takes, because there are certain people in my organization that are better at managing people than others, but somehow, because of their seniority, they still end up with a team underneath them. And then, that person's role changes, and the people that worked for them get allocated to different people, or they get involved in different projects. And all of a sudden that person's been there for maybe a year, and, nothing has been said about their performance. And then they come to work with someone else, and actually they're below expectation levels. And, then you get into that whole performance management piece, where actually if that had been picked up and spotted sooner, either in their initial process or in their probation, you could have avoided that and tried to help them so that you weren't having that. But from the performance management, that's like really challenging, because like you say, that's really time intensive. You've got to do that on top of your job, but you've also got to make sure that you're being fair to the person that you're having those conversations with, because obviously the end result of that should always be to try and get them to turn around so that they stay. You're not looking for an exit from the business. So it's really time intensive. And I think again, organizations should look at who becomes a supervisor or a manager of people, because there's some people that are really good at technical or deals or doing the work, but actually they're not a good manager, and just because they bill loads or they bring in loads of work, they end up with a team around them. But it's about recognizing people's strengths, which some people are better at than others. And having been someone that's been in that situation, that's inherited someone that's been at the organization for a while, it's then really difficult for them, because they've been having okay objectives and pay reviews and stuff, and then 2 years into the role I start questioning, well, how have you ended up getting to that? And they're then wondering why it wasn't picked up before. And it's having now kind of kept a good relationship with those people, they're like frustrated that it was allowed to can go on so long, because that period when I was having to challenge them and talk to them was not easy for either of us. And we sit opposite each other and are looking, well, we did look at each other. It's hard when you then lift your head and it's like, right, you've had this really crap conversation, and then it's like, oh, do you want a cup of tea? It's hard. And their frustration was, why was it allowed to get to that point, really?
I think that point, it's been a raging old debate in kind of HRE land for years and years about like appraisals and all that malarkey. But take aside whether you have a once a year or not, it's that like Nick was talking about, it's that regularity of kind of conversation. And Jane, it is hard in a week where you've got loads of deadlines and pressures to kind of almost take that step back. But it's something people say, oh, I've got to do it on top of my job. And I hear that kind of quite a lot. It's like, but it is part of your job. So actually, rather than try and separate it, try and incorporate it, if you like. And it's easier said than done, for sure. I've got a team that I manage as well, and I'm certainly don't always practice what I preach, but it's the normalizing that kind of conversation rather than kind of saving it up for an appraisal, or seeing as a kind of lesser important. It's one of those important, not urgent things often, like Stephen Covey's time management. You've got to find the time for the important, not urgent stuff.
I think some of it comes down to company structures as well, and things like profit, P&L, profit and loss centers, and the targets that individuals are given, and not necessarily all being aligned with what it kind of takes to be able to, for the manager to do the job and manage those people very effectively. And that comes right from the top usually, doesn't it? And the way that organisations are structured.
I guess kind of if you're working for yourself, Emma, I don't know if you work for others, you've also got to also take that time out for a bit of personal self-reflection too. It's kind of like you might not have necessarily loads of people around you all the time, but be able to kind of take the time out to almost do that bit of reflection kind of as well. Because I think often people who work on their own forget to do that bit, or work in kind of quite an isolated sort of way. It's just actually take some time out for you.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I think, well, I started my business in November 2019, unfortunately. Wow. So it's been like a bit of a, baptism of fire. And obviously with no knowledge, but because of that, I haven't been as busy as I, anticipated with clients, because although my industry's been quite busy, to find clients is not so easy in a pandemic. So I have had actually quite a lot of time for self-reflection, which has been
perhaps more than you anticipated. But it just
Yeah,
going back to
and
kind of
development
Penny's.
on myself.
Yeah, well, but it goes back to Penny's point in terms of kind of like, the bosses or whatever need to kind of be in good shape.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot of time like, what do I need to do for other people? But it's equally making sure you're spending time for you.
Yeah. But I suppose moving forward, I need to make sure I build that time. Like, I'm getting busier now, and I'm able to get out there and generate clients a bit easier. So I need to make sure that I recognise that.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting conversations. I think we're going to zoom back. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to you.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry I've not had a chance to talk. You've probably thought I've been really ignorant and I've been working away on another screen, but I've actually been making some notes on everything you've been saying, been listening very attentively. It's very easy. It's been a wonderful conversation to listen to. So thank you very much. Sometimes it's like drawing blood from stone to get these things to start. But I was flapping around about why my breakout room only lasted 5 minutes when we started. So
it's always difficult.
That.
I think you're let off because facilitating these things, you've kind of got eyes on many screens, really, don't you?
Yeah. So please forgive me, but I was listening. I have made some notes. Right, I'll close the rooms. I'll see you back in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We'll just wait a few seconds for everyone to come back in.
Was at this point you're thinking, is everybody making it back? Have I lost anybody?
No, we've got a full. In fact, we appear to have one more person than we started off with.
Well done, Sean.
Brilliant. So welcome back, everyone. Nicola, I'll hand over to you. I've taken some notes for my room.
Yep. Well, I will start then because I think we were room 1. Lots and lots of chatter all the way through. What I think we came away from it, well, my take on it, and I stand to be corrected by anybody in our room, was that a lot of us become managers, but without any formal training on that soft skill. It's because we are good at what we do. And what we haven't been taught are those soft skills. And I suggested that perhaps with Pro Manchester, that's why we get asked to run so many soft skills events, or that's what we should be focusing on in these discussion groups. So what we thought is that there needs to be better training for managers so that we are taught these skills and we're not just effectively good at the day job. Was a big take from our group, but lots of interesting discussion. I think we could have gone on for double the time, but I'm conscious it's 10:57. So who are we moving on to next, Sean? From room 2.
I'll be selfish and I'll go if you want.
Yep. Okay.
It was really, really good conversation. Everyone picked up right from the off, and we had a really good chat for the full time. And as you said, we could have gone double, if not more. It'll be really great to maybe do one of these in person soon. But yes, we really sort of knuckled down to similar to what you just said, in that, you go to university, you specialize in a subject, you then, go on and progress your career through that subject or topic or sector, and then you get promoted to a people manager. And that doesn't, because you're an amazing accountant, doesn't necessarily mean you're an amazing people manager, or you get given the right or the correct training to become a people manager. And that's where possibly the problem lies. Plus, on top of that, some organisations, particularly after the financial crash of 2009, reducing some costs in training, so they weren't giving some of the soft skills training. So yeah, very much similar topics. I've written a load more notes, but we'll send those out.
We can pull that together, can't we, and put it out into a blog, Sean, in due course, because there's been some recommendations on books. We've got slides, we've got everything else, so we can put that onto the Pro Manchester website, can't we? Have we got Rebecca there? I think you were.
We have. Hello. Well, I've just been mercilessly picking Anita's brain for the last 20 minutes, so she'll probably be sending me a bill after this, I have to say. So we were talking about the active bystander, which is sort of something that that Anita talks about a lot, and that kind of being able to stand up for people in difficult situations. We're having these difficult conversations, and she gave us some tips around the 4 Ds. So you can either address something directly, you can delay it and take somebody to one side and do it, delegate it to HR, that'll be you, Cara, and distract. So if there's a situation that's kind of kicking off a little bit, to say, oh, can you just come across over here and have a look at this for me instead, to kind of diffuse the situation a little bit, and maybe then deal with it later. Because I think a lot of what we try and do in that situation, we've been doing quite a bit of this at Crow recently. We're starting to have these conversations, but then we're not, once we're getting into a situation where it becomes a bit difficult, we really don't know how to kind of deal with that. So Anita has given me some really good tips as to how we might deal with that, and we could share all the inappropriate comments that we've heard that week as a discussion at some point. So that was it.
Oh, really. Rebecca, you can't just put that into the conversation like that.
I think that's
we'll setting up another call.
Chat for another day. Lunch
in person.
I hasten to add, before Cara tells me off, that's not necessarily what I've heard this week in Manchester at Crow. There you go.
Thank you.
I'm glad that
breathe a sigh of relief, Cara. It's all right.
That spade is working well there, isn't it, as you keep digging?
Yeah.
Have we got Michelle for the final group?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about, ideally you want to do preventative stuff, so knitting back to what Nick had talked around about, that kind of culture piece, and then just we talked about practical examples. So let's say, for example, you've got a colleague where you need their support on a client issue and they're not coming back to you and you're really frustrated. So you kind of, when you might be in the office normally, you might go up to the desk and you can see they've got the head in the hands, and then you have a bit of empathy for that situation. But because of it being virtual, it might be another email chaser saying, I did ask you already about this and the client's chasing me. And so we're trying to talk around, actually, is there some practical things around less email, ring someone up, put the camera on and just say, oh, it'd be great to see you, and just, how are you? And then you might understand then. So sometimes I think some of these things are a bit harder when they're virtual. I shared a little bit of a practical example I'd got with a friend of mine who is getting a colleague asking her to just do this when she's talking. And so we talked around, right, what would your practical advice be? Because I think what we were feeling was, when Anita and Nick are talking, you completely get the principles, but how do you put that into practice when you're in a difficult situation? And I loved, so sorry, and I've forgotten his name now, but what he was talking around is, in any situation, trying to ask questions such as, can I just understand what you mean when you do X? Because actually they might not realize that they're doing something, or again, it's trying to understand things factually and less. There needs to be a sense of emotion, but putting your chimp back in its box.
Thank you. I'm conscious we've just gone slightly over time, so I will now draw matters to a close. Thank you, Sean, as always, for setting up the event and all the technical stuff, because goodness knows what would have happened had I done any of that technical stuff. I'd also like to thank our speakers, Anita and Nick, for giving up their time and preparing their presentations. I think there was a lot to think about, and thank you everyone for coming today and contributing in our groups. We'll pull our thinking together and we will get that out to you. We'll be sending out feedback forms. Please do complete the feedback forms. They're so helpful for our committee and for planning future events, and also understanding what you see the issues are and what we can do for our future events. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day, and see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.